Greetings to all of you tuned in live with me right here on TMH. This is our daily English news. Our headlines today: a new proposed U.S. legislation holds Ethiopia accountable for the abuses committed within the Tigray region. Failure to ensure full humanitarian access into Tigray now will result in mass deaths, as the African Arguments has warned. And many Tigrayans rounded up and detained across the entirety of the country are still said to be unaccounted for. Our main news for today: a proposed U.S. legislation holds Ethiopia accountable for the abuses and the atrocities that have been committed in the Tigray region. The House Foreign Affairs Committee will meet today discussing the H.R. 6600, which among other things stipulates sanctions and against any party that has undermined or even attempted to undermine efforts with respect to a ceasefire and a negotiated settlement to end the civil war within Ethiopia. The proposed legislation is a co-sponsored U.S. Congressman by U.S. Congressman Milnowski as well as Brad Sherman. According to Congressman Brad Sherman, H.R. 6600 holds Ethiopia accountable for the abuses in Tigray, and Sherman's amendment conditions sanctions relief on the Ethiopian government, allowing aid into Tigray and ending ethnically based detentions of Tigrayans as well. In related news, the African Union has called the U.S. as well as the EU to lift what it's called a unilateral coercive sanctions on Eritrea. Horn of Africa analyst Rashid Abdi, in a tweet, expressed his dismay, saying, "Isn't Eritrea biggest destabilizer in Horn of Africa, largest exporter of desperate youth, orchestrator of the Tigray war, instructor-in-chief of authoritarian learning for fragile states like Somalia, Ethiopia?" Another current affairs analyst, Medhain Tadessa, also wrote on his Twitter, saying, "One can ask whether the defeat of an AU principle in recent years is due to the crisis of leadership or the crisis of norms." He added, saying, "Results is the same. Summits, African votes at the UN, or even the slogan African Solutions serves as a conduit for enabling and normalizing atrocities committed within the continent." Moving on to our next news: landmark case filed against Ethiopia for the human rights violations against Tigray. Today, Legal Action Worldwide and its counsel Du Bois as Flipton LLP, as well as the Pan-African Lawyers Union, have submitted a landmark complaint against Ethiopia before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights for serious and massive human rights violations against Tigray civilians. This is the first time that the African Commission, which is responsible for promoting the rights contained in the African Charter, human and people's rights, ensuring their protection in Africa, has been requested to examine the conduct of the Ethiopian forces within the Tigray region. The complaint alleges that Ethiopia is responsible for a wide range of human rights violations under the African Charter, including military targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure, mass and extrajudicial killings, gender-based sexual violence, arbitrary arrest and detention, mass displacements of civilians, destruction of property, foodstuff and religious and cultural heritage sites, ethnic discrimination, as well as enforced information blackouts as well. The complaint requests that the African Commission order Ethiopia to stop all violations and abuses against Tigrayan civilians and allow unfettered access of food and humanitarian aid within the region, and ensure the protection of human rights as well as the Ethiopians, especially within the Tigray region. It also requests that the African Commission immediately order these measures on an interim basis to protect Tigrayans and their civilians from urgent risk of irreparable harm. Legal Action Worldwide represents victims from Tigray who have provided testimony for the case but cannot be listed as a complaint due to fear of reprisals by their own government. Catherine Amfar, co-chair of the Du Bois International Dispute Resolution and Public International Law Group, said, "We are honored to amplify the voices of Tigrayans, victims, and to seek accountability for those who have been perpetrated against these horrific crimes as well." The group have called African commissions to urge the government to end a remedy and the abuses which they are responsible for. Many Tigrayans rounded up and detained across the country have still been unaccounted for. According to the Human Rights Watch, while the government has released some detainees in recent weeks, thousands of Tigrayans arbitrarily maintained by the government remain in formal as well as informal detention sites all over the country. Families of victims say that they don't know where the whereabouts of their loved ones are currently. There are also reports of execution for many Tigrayans who were looked up unidentified detention centers. Reports are also emerging some 1,200 Tigrayans who were brought back from Mizan Tepe concentration camp in southern Ethiopia to a detention center in Addis Ababa called Indaba Samuel are said to be languishing in extreme conditions. Sources indicated that these detainees are suffering from hunger, illness, and inhumane treatment overall. An article published by the World Peace Foundation says Ma'ala, once a bustling city, is now reeling from hunger and an extremely crippling siege. Temnit Bayru has more on this story.
The first of a three-part piece by Mulgeta Gabrahewat, titled Ma'ala, a City Under Siege, describes how the war that began in 2020 has fundamentally altered life in Tigray's capital city. The story recounts how Ma'ala, which was once a bustling city, is limping under a complete siege for more than 6 months now and counting. Tigray in general is encircled 360 degrees by hostile forces, and there is no telecommunication and internet services, no banking and related services, and no businesses, no electricity, no commercial flights in and out, no land communication outside the region. In July, Abiy Ahmed, in his publicly televised speech to his parliament, said that he has reduced Ma'ala, the once vibrant city with a pre-war estimated population of 700,000 that was once one of the economic and political centers of Ethiopia, to Bashasha, a small district town where he grew up in Jimma, Agaro. His statement was followed by an interview by General Albaw Taddasa, a retired but reinstated lieutenant general who was asked why the Ethiopian army evacuated Ma'ala and most of Tigray. He said the following in response: "We have destroyed all the institutions of the government. We have destroyed all the social and economic infrastructure. And through these actions, we have fulfilled our objectives." General Albaw tacitly expressed the objectives of the military campaign: destruction pure and simple, as stated by Mulgeta Gabrahewat. As a recognition of what he and his army did, this retired lieutenant general is now promoted to a 4-star general. If one can pass through the blockade, one can witness that Abiy Ahmed has succeeded in reducing Ma'ala into not a village like Bashasha, but into something worse. In a city reeling from hunger, more than 1.6 children under the age of 5 and lactating and pregnant women are suffering from malnutrition at a rate of 60%. The stores of all humanitarian organizations have run empty as a result of the complete siege of Ma'ala from any outside assistance. The overall condition of children in the region is critical. Data from the Regional Health Bureau indicates that acute malnutrition in children under 5 has hit 29.1%, of which 7.1% have been diagnosed with severe acute malnutrition. Many of them are dying. The referral system in Tigray is broken, as most of the rural clinics and hospitals are ransacked and non-operational. For this reason, children and mothers who arrive at the referral hospital arrive in critical condition. Dr. Muhammad Mustafa, head of the Pediatrics and Child Health Department, remembers a woman who carried her child to the hospital and who immediately collapsed at hunger at her arrival to the frontline desk of the hospital. Both mother and child were treated for malnutrition and related health problems. It is very common to find the parents of affected children to be themselves affected by hunger. Dr. Muhammad indicates that a number of the children under treatment for severe malnutrition also come from families who normally had a good income, who can't access their deposits and assets elsewhere due to the complete siege of the city. He cited the example of a son of a physician he treated for malnutrition as an indication of how much the famine has affected society, including the middle class in Ma'ala. Cut off from the national grid by the federal government, Tigray has no electricity. Ma'ala is in the dark in the evenings and has no nightlife. There are hardly any cars in the streets of Ma'ala due to the unavailability of fuel and gas stations. Hospitals have no medicine and functioning diagnosis equipment. There are too many stories of the untimely death of patients who are surviving under drug regimens for chronic health issues. Horrendous stories of sexual violence in its hospitals and safe houses abound. Women and girls in Maqala, like the rest of the Tigrayan women and girls, have suffered a lot as the Ethiopian and Eritrean armies and Amhara forces on a genocide mission used sexual violence as an instrument of their war. Mihira Radai, a social worker and coordinator of the one-stop service at Aida Referral Hospital, narrates the story she heard from victims, that most rapes were perpetrated against married women and usually in front of their children and family members, and at times in front of their husbands. The crimes were committed along with dehumanizing insults on the victims. The pervasiveness of the crimes was so much that Ethiopian soldiers even raped a medical school student within the compound of the referral hospital. Helen Garmay, a mother of two, was one of the victims of sexual violence from Adaga Hamus. The soldiers of the EDF and ENDF killed her 12-year-old son. She was then gang raped while seeing her slain son in front of her. She came to Eider Hospital with multiple medical problems and traumatized by the brutality she faced. Helen had exposed the atrocities to the public several times, and the hospital felt she was fully rehabilitated. However, Mihira, with tears in her eyes, told me that she had just heard of Helen's death. There are a number of rape victims who have now given birth to children conceived as a result of rape. After hearing the horrendous stories of sexual violence, one becomes puzzled by how a perverted political motive could turn human beings into what they have become now, capable of committing crimes in this manner.
News for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Goodbye.